Greetings, good evening, and welcome to all of our beloved viewers. I'm Avisa with Uncle Bobbie's Coffee and Books, your favorite Philadelphia Black-owned bookstore. And I will soon have the pleasure of introducing tonight's long-awaited author discussion for South to America, A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of a Nation by the esteemed Imani Perry. Yeah. I'm really excited to get into this book talk, but first I'm just going to lay some housekeeping rules. The book was first released earlier this year in January under Echo Press by way of HarperCollins. If you haven't picked up your copy yet, you can do so right now by clicking the green button beneath the screen. It says Buy South to America here. If you happen to find yourself in Germantown in our neck of the woods, you can come visit Uncle Bobbie's and pick up your copy there. We got signed first editions while supplies last. After the discussion, you know how we do. We'll be leaving 10 to 15 minutes for the audience Q&A. So over the course of tonight's event, viewers are invited to submit their questions by using the Ask a Question module at the bottom of the screen. All right, please allow me to introduce our panelists. Our moderator is Tarana Burke. She's published 2 books last year that you may have heard of. You Are Your Best Thing, Vulnerability, Shame, Resilience, and the Black Experience, co-authored with Brene Brown, and Unbound, My Story of Liberation and the Birth of the Me Too Movement. I'm going to get her up here right now. Hi, Tarana.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
All right. And now for our featured author. She has written very many books that you can also find on the Uncle Bobbie shelves, including Looking for Lorraine, The Radiant and Radical Life of Lorraine Hansberry, Breathe, A Letter to My Sons, Vexy Thing on Gender and Liberation, and May We Forever Stand, History of the Black National Anthem. Please welcome Imani Perry.
Thank you.
Let's see. Can you try again? Let's see what anything. That's good.
I think I had 2 windows open.
Don't worry, y'all. We're gonna figure it out.
All right, let's see. There must be a setting that I have messed up, right?
If you've got headphones, I feel like that usually helps, but multiple windows might be a problem.
What about now?
I think we're good.
I had 3 windows open. That's what's
all right. I'm gonna leave you to it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I just think you so hip hop. You had to come in with the echo effect.
Hey, girl.
Hey, girl. I'm fine. We're gonna pretend like we didn't talk all day.
Right. Remember what we were saying?
Yeah. No, I'm good. I put on my good shirt and earrings for you tonight.
Me too.
Because I'm so excited.
I'm going to talk about the bottom half of our attire.
No, we don't talk about they don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about the bottom half. Focus on right here, what's in the frame. So yeah, I've been dying to get into this. I'm like so jealous. I've watched all these other talks and conversations. We're like, this is our turn now.
Yes.
So we're gonna jump right in because they only gave us a little bit of time. So
wait, before we start, can I say something?
Yes, please.
One, thank you so much for doing this with me. You know how much I love you. I don't know how much the world knows how much I love you, but also this is my last author conversation.
Oh,
it's so perfect that it is with you. I have panels at book festivals, but and I don't know if people know, we met in Alabama.
Yeah.
You are my movement daughter, sister in every way. You are the person who I talk to about the South in a big way more than anyone. And so it just means the world. And you're also, and I know everybody knows this, you're also extremely busy. So I'm so grateful. I love you so much. Okay, now we're going to have a good time.
We're gonna have a
Oh,
big.
they said more volume. Okay, I'm gonna speak up.
Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Okay.
So, I used to say, we talk about, so I know I've said this to you before, but I used to say all the time that, to Black folks all the time, that I think that, just like we have on our bucket list, that we need to travel back to the motherland, right? We need to travel back to Africa. That I think that every Black person should travel to the South, not for just your family reunion, not for just your, for a classic or your college reunion,
Mhm.
but we should travel to the South for the purpose of reverence.
Yes.
That we should walk the land and stand in the places our ancestors and foremothers and fathers stood and pay respect to the land where so much of our blood, sweat, and tears were shed, not just during chattel slavery either, right? Like there was lots of our blood, sweat, and tears shed there, and we need to both mourn and celebrate in the South,
Yes.
and like take tours of the South and learn about the South in a very particular way. And your book does that, even though it's not just about Black folks, but it does a superior and eloquent job of telling us exactly why. And I know you're supposed to read, but I wanted to read I'm all over, and I'm going to be all over the place this time. It's still saying volume. Can y'all hear? Or is that an old?
They're saying that's all right. Volume.
Right. Okay.
Right? Is that what you're saying? I think that's what they're saying. We'll
The
see.
volume is good. Okay. There's a passage in the Soul of the South chapter that I thought hit the nail on the head perfectly for that. And when it's just a short one. It says, the South has remained the region where the majority of African Americans live. And even with the declining population in the Blackest South, the Blackest Southerners remain. So the question I always ask is not why did Black folks leave, but why did they stay?
Mm.
The answer is home. If everyone had departed, no one would have been left to tend to the ancestors' graves.
Mm.
When you walk past a plantation, even if not outfitted soberly or joyously in the history of slavery, you are forced to remember something. And it is a vile, bloody remembrance. But it is also one that should strike awe at the human mastery of existence that is evidenced in the blues, in the experience of the divine, in the spirit body, that keloid covered, scarred Black body, that violated, hungry, sparingly clothed body, the labor flattened, thick soled feet. Had these graves not been seen daily over generations, had we not been witness to them, I do not know how it would have been possible to sustain hope, or at least to pretend to. I was so moved when I read that passage, and it to me fit in what I was talking about witnessing, and about how important it is to witness for us, all of us, to have reverence for the South. We have jokes about the South. We have all kind of things that we toss away. It's just like a thing that we can say in passing, and minimize the South, but it is so important to our existence. Is the place that we have mined hope from for generations. And I'm so grateful for this book, because since I've left the South, everybody knows I'm from New York, and I think I even celebrate my Caribbean side so much more than I do my Southern side. And it just gave me so much more pride and so much, like, put a battery in my back, to really come back to that place that I was before in that. And I just thank you, first of all. But can you just talk a little bit about not just this passage, but that necessity?
Yeah. I mean, well, thank you. And I almost, for me, part of the point of the book is also to say, just as we say the Gulf Coast is part of, and academia is part of the Circum-Caribbean. The Caribbean and the South, that the Caribbean is deeply connected to the South, right? These are places that were made together for the same purposes with the same, so there's distinctions, right? Language, culture, the form of captivity, but the building blocks are the same, which is something that people have a hard time holding on to, but it's really true. And it's part of why we have all these echoes, right? We always find these sort of cultural commonalities because it comes from the same root. But that piece of a conception of home that requires you do, whether or not it's explicit, because that's not so much our tradition, right? Of like explicit ancestor veneration. But we are tending to something ancestral. And I feel, and we are just, and part of it is we're still, is just simply, we're still here, right? So you see, to be, I mean, at least for me, like to be in the place where it happened, right? The violence over and over and over again, and people danced and laughed and sang and imagined. Right? People talk about Afrofuturism a lot today, and I'm like, what was more Afrofuturistic than the freedom dreams of enslaved people?
Oh my God.
Been Afrofuturist since we got here, at least, right? And so, and we're here. We're still here. We're not yet free. We're free. We're closer, and we're here. And we're here because of them. And we don't need to know all their names to know that we're here because of them. And so I feel like there's something, and part of this is I don't come from a great migration family. Like this is part of my identity. My family who left the South left for school. Most people went back, right? My family, my home base is in Alabama. My mother is in Boston, where she took me. I got, one person in LA, one person in New York. That's it. So it's also like there's an identity piece too, right? Like people are saying, why did you call it home? You left when you're so young, because that's where my people are.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I also think Caribbean folks are often more direct about this, right? Like you don't meet someone who was born in Jamaica who's like, I'm not Jamaican.
Right. Exactly. Right. Or even generations out, right? I identify with the Caribbean and our generation. It's my grandfather,
right.
But you are indoctrinated really from a very young age, and I wear my bangles. You have that put in you. You eat the food, you hear the stories, you get you have the traditions. That's not. How dare you separate yourself? Right. It's just not even.
And I would say that was the message from my family too. Mm-hmm. People like there was one time my oldest son D was like, he was little. He's like, Mom talks to everybody on the street. And my auntie was like, why do you think that is? And he said, because she's Black. And he said, because she's Black and Southern. Mm-hmm. That's why she talks to everybody, mm-hmm. Right? Like to get, but that this. So it was not an option for me in terms of how I was embraced, right? I was supposed to know where my home was, and I still do, and I value it because to the extent that I have been up here and been in these places that are very, in many instances, unfriendly, the lessons from home are what has got me through and also allowed me to actually value myself.
Well, you talked about our connection.
Yes.
And we have a lot of different connections, which, we still find connections, and we've been friends for a long time.
Yes. We're going to find out we're cousins one day.
I'm just going to just bless my heart. But I have, like I said, I'm always one of your biggest cheerleaders. But, so I've watched several of the conversations that you've had since the book came out. And I've heard folks talk about this book and as a book about history and about politics and many aspects that are apt, right? But the overwhelming feeling that I was left with, and I told you this already, obviously, but the overwhelming from I was left with is that this is a beautiful movement history. This book is, I mean, and I guess I am so, I skew in that direction,
That's
you know,
me too.
obviously.
Yeah.
But from Harper's Ferry to me too, it is just, and this is the thing I love about you. Again, I'm sorry, y'all. It's always biased, but it's a bias because she's my friend. But it's just seriously outside of friendship, it is what it is. But you don't just give us history; you wrap it in these. Me and Yaba always call her a unicorn because you really are a unicorn. They're really. This is why y'all are tuned in, right? Because there are very few people literally in the world that are like Imani Perry. But you give us, I had to write this down because you give us beautiful anecdotes and illuminate data in such a way that layer in and texture for why movement is necessary. And that's the part that's different, right? It's not just like, well, this happened then and this happened then, and because everybody, that's what historians do.
Right.
But it's like this sneaky way, and if you haven't read the book, and by now a lot of you probably have read it, but if you have, you understand what I'm saying. If you haven't, it's such a pleasant surprise. There's several parts in the book. There's I really enjoyed, obviously, in the beginning, the part about Harper's Ferry and John Brown. But when you talk about Mississippi and Parchment, and that's one of my favorite parts in the book, right? And you talk about the falsetto and the singing.
Yeah.
But that whole passage, suddenly we're thinking about mass incarceration, right? Suddenly we're thinking about abolition.
Yeah.
Suddenly we think, right? And it's just this sneaks up on you because it touches you in such a way. And now we're thinking about, we have hard facts and data. Parchment is a horrific place. And so we have this information about the place, but then we have this texture that touches you, right? And it just really pulls you into the story. And so my question is just like, people always ask that, was that intentional? Or do you think that because movement is in your DNA, it just spills out naturally?
Well, it's both, right? I mean, so it is, and this is funny because historians don't generally claim me because I don't tell history in the way you're supposed to tell it, right? Because what I'm interested in is human relation, right? Human beings' relation to each other and to the land, and how we get to right relation, out of exploitation and cruelty and domination, violence, and all of this, right? So that is how I'm interested in the past because I want us to get out of this, right? And so when I go to a story of the past, part of what I'm trying to figure out about what happened here is like, how did people become this way?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, so there's the personal, right? Which is like when I'm talking about, growing up and getting calls from prison all the time, letters from prison all the time, because my dad was a prison activist and talked about mass incarceration was coming in the 70s, and people told him you're crazy. And he was tracking the data because he was an epidemiologist, and he was tracking the statistics. He was like, no, there are going to be 2 million people in prison. People laughed at him for saying that. But but being an organizer, like you hear, like so there's a human voice, there's love, you want, but it's not just mass incarceration. These are people and you love, and some of whom are still in prison because they were trying to get freedom, while there are people who took everything, right? Who basically decimated millions of lives who walk free, right? So there's the movement piece, but there's the intimate part, and then you try to access the emotional, right? Like, so to think about, well, what does it mean? Because I think I talk about Johnny Imani Harris, who we were close to be on a plantation, right? To be punished because he first got attacked by cops
Peace.
to a white neighborhood.
Right.
And then he's sent back to the plantation. Like, so you can't, but you have to know, you have to care about the movement. You can't care about the official story to get that. But to me, that's the puzzle. We're still locked in these human relations that are fundamentally unjust. Individual stories are the way that you can understand that best, and not the abstraction. The abstract, like this, the theory, the social theory. I've read all of it. I teach it, but that's not. I want, as a writer, as a person, I want to connect to people at the heart level, not just at the intellectual level. That is important to me. So that's
I didn't, because this mentions me, I didn't want to go to the quote about Montgomery, but right up to before you mentioned me, that passage is so beautiful about I'm not going to bring that part in, but I just want to share this with y'all because it's so beautiful. I'm not going to read the whole thing.
This is also, I'm sorry, but Tarana is Rosa Parks' direct political descendant, and y'all have to understand this.
She gonna let y'all understand this.
No, it's important because people don't understand that Me Too is part of a genealogy of Black women's struggle. That is, so that the fact that we get Rosa Parks the way we do means that we don't get that connection. So, okay, sorry.
I think that is important in terms of movement, because people need to understand it in the Me Too movement in a larger political struggle, because we don't see it as a social justice. We don't see it as a social justice movement. So I do appreciate it being placed in the book where it is, because it places it as social justice. But what you say about movement is directly connected to what you just said about the ethics of building a just society begin at the place where you can touch another person, and the moral imagination reaches out further. This is what is meant, as far as I can tell, by the importance of grassroots. It is not simply that struggle should be not dictated by elites. Of course, that is true. But it also means that we must become different kinds of people in relation to one another, that we become the people suited by society that we want to create. That is, I've outlined it so much that I can't see it. That is I should put my glasses on. I'm forgetting that I'm this lady now. That is the best of the tradition of the Southern movement. It lives even though it has been forgotten by many, including many who lived it. It is necessary to build ethical relations despite or even because of the fear they might elicit. That just feels like it should be put on billboards or postcards and mailed out in mass. Like, it's just so perfect. I feel like the other thing that is important to understand about the South is that most movement flows, going back before civil rights, before, we have people like Amelia Boynton, who we only start her history in Selma in 1965, and she was doing work from 1920, right? Like, there's so much movement history, particularly with Black women in the South, that gets erased.
Yes.
And it's grassroots, on the ground, community, door to door. And it's just this, what you're describing right here. And so many young folks nowadays don't have that history. Right. And they swing from like King to Black Power, skip the 80s and 90s to Ferguson, and they don't, and this is fundamentally what's missing.
And it's a continuum. It's so true. And it's also, what you just said made me think about this other piece, which I think connects to something you asked earlier about migration, right? Because we talk about the Great Migration, because another thing that happens is people think if you're in the public eye, you think all the Black people moved out of the South in the 20th century, right? Except for the ones who were marching, right? Like, it's a weird distortion. But what we forget is that not just people went back to the South. And many of the Northern organizers, even if they were born in the North, they were educated in the South, because that's where HBCUs were. And not just that, Black people from the Caribbean and Africa were educated at Southern HBCUs heavily, because white supremacy was a global project, right? In
Right.
colonized places, they excluded Black people from schools there too. So the South has always had this expansive political imagination because the Black world was there in institutions. Like, in addition to the organizing that had to do with, like, holding back the chaos of white supremacy that happened all the time, right? Even social organization that might not be understood as movement was critical to create the possibility for movement. People had to trust each other. People had to have strategies to remain safe. People had to have ways of settling conflict within community such that the full force of white supremacy wouldn't come. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah. Listen, we could do this all day. So, not to keep dwelling on Alabama, but I was literally mesmerized.
All the time.
So for y'all who don't know, I'm not, my family's actually from South Carolina, but I lived in Alabama I went to school in Alabama. I grew up in an organization that was based in Alabama. So I started going to Alabama when I was 14. And then my child was born in Alabama and raised in Alabama. So I have a long connection to Alabama. I was literally mesmerized by the Alabama chapters, and clearly I have a bias, but I thought it was so wonderful that you began talking about when you started on Northern Alabama. You did not start with King, you did not start with the movement, but you started with NASA and the Nazis.
Yeah.
And people do not associate Alabama with either of those things.
Right.
And I just want you to talk
yeah.
a little more about that, why you did it, and just about that in general, because I think that is a part of the history that gets separated from Alabama altogether. And please bring up the Abernathy protesting the launch, because that was amazing to me.
Yeah. Thank you. So I will say this, like, there's a couple things that are coming together in that setup, just as a craft thing. So one of the central tensions of the book is, like, the yearning to be free and the greed that animates the U.S. president, right? So people talk about the sky. So many writers talk about the sky in Alabama. It's beautiful. I don't know what it is. Right. Night sky, days, it's just a beautiful sky. And so I was thinking about what it meant, to look up into the sky, right? And then to juxtapose, right, the Alabama skies with what happened after World War II, where the US government invited Nazis to Alabama to work on the space race. And what that meant, right? So you have Black men who have fought in World War II who are still Jim Crowed in Alabama. You have the argument that World War II is the most righteous war ever. We have, as academics, you tell the story World War II was important to the civil rights movement because it was, it raised the question of fascism. But the U.S. government is inviting fascists, and they're inviting fascists because they want to win the space race. I mean, if that's not a juxtaposition of the yearning to be free and greed, right? Right? It's the desire to win.
Oh,
right? Destroys basic humanity, both for Jewish people, right? If you're inviting Nazis, and for Black folks on the soil, right? So the idea was to sort of illustrate the point and then think about the sort of longer trajectory of what the space race meant politically. Like, so we have a Cold War story, but we don't have this story, sort of Abernathy coming to the space launch as a protest with mules, right? Wearing overalls, saying basically, so you have these millions of dollars to go to the moon, and folks in the rural South are still hungry. Now, some of us know, who are activist oriented, Gil Scott-Heron's, right. Whitey's on the moon, right? A rat just bit my sister now, but Whitey's on the moon. But we don't remember Gil Scott-Heron, who is Jamaican and African American, but raised in Jackson, Tennessee. These frameworks for this critique, right? So that Abernathy, we see the marches, but we don't think about him as someone who's engaged in a critique of the budget of the United States and the military aspirations underneath it. or to understand Gil Scott-Heron, who talks about his love of language coming from Tennessee, right? These frames of a more expansive political framework that comes out of the Black South, but also the global projects that happened in the South, right? Because we, as a general, the country thinks the South, oh, it's backwards, da, da, da. Okay, but you want to understand oil and the global foreign policy around oil, you got to go through Southern history through Texas. You want to understand what happened in Central America and Latin America, you got to go through New Orleans. It literally is the grounds for imagining how we do things with relationship to other countries.
Yep. Period. No, period. So one of the most powerful quotes, because the book literally talks about the understanding the soul of a nation. And this nation is harder and harder to understand as having a soul. But one of the most powerful quotes in the book, and I know I keep reading. I want you to read something in a minute, but I know because I got it all marked up so I can keep reading these little
okay,
real quick quotes. But one of the most powerful quotes in the book is when you talk about race and labor, because I also think it's so apt for this moment in our country and the rise of far left politics, from Tea Party to Trumpism.
Yeah.
You have this part here where you say Du Bois explained that in the redemption South, the white worker was offered whiteness to set himself apart from the Black worker. And no matter how hungry, how imprisoned by labor, how deprived he was, that was his gift, or grift, as the case may be. One way to read this is in simple Marxian terms. The working class was divided against itself by means of the false consciousness of race. But that is too easy an interpretation in a society that has been forged by race. Whiteness was an article of faith. It redeemed suffering and afforded compensation in the ability to feed bloodthirstiness, lynching, burning, beating, raping, humiliating, which also became matters of faith. That might not provide a tidy economic explanation, but it became an undeniable and central aspect of the social order. It was material. That really struck me as very much in relation to what we are seeing and dealing with now with the whole Midwest is this heart of America and blah, blah, blah. All of that's the rhetoric we hear around that.
Yeah, no. And it's true because, we talk about, well, why do white poor people vote against their interests or feed into this sort of racial logic instead of demanding, right, economic justice?
Mm-hmm.
But race is a matter of faith. It is not just, it's more than false consciousness, and it has rituals attached to it that make people feel something, and it does give something, right? Like it doesn't give justice, right? But it gives, and one of the things I think about, just since you mentioned the Midwest, right? One of the things I write briefly about, but it's really important, is that the Great Migration was for white people too. White people left the South in greater numbers and settled the Midwest also. So this is still like, these are descendants of the South in the Midwest. And part of why it's such a fiction and so easy to mischaracterize what's happening in the Midwest, I think, and part of the reason why people want to call that the heartland, is it's detached from its legacies, right? Its legacies in Europe of descendants, its legacies in the South. And so even the fact to call a heartland a place that's not connected to water in a country that is all built upon people coming through waterways, it's cutting off history, right? And so I do think that, when people talk about the Bible Belt, it stretches from the South through the Midwest because it's a path of migration, right? And there's aspiration to settle in the middle, and also the recognition that people are still going to live hard scrabble lives. And I think this is important too, because we have these moments, like it's part of why I spent so much time in Appalachia, because there are these moments that are really powerful in terms of the labor movement history, organizing that happened amongst white folks. And then thinking about, why does that get shut down? And the idea in terms of, why does the moral imagination get shut down at the question of race, right? Why why is Highlander still being subject, multiracial movement center still being subject to white supremacist attack, right? Is a question for us to grapple.
Yeah.
with.
That Appalachia chapter was so good. That Appalachia, that part with you talking to that man, I just kept imagining you smiling and listening and smiling and listening, like
The Confederate, yes, reenactor.
oh, that's right. That wasn't in Appalachia. That was in
West Virginia,
Yeah.
But it's like to think, but it's all. So can I say something about that guy? Because he was so interesting. Because he's this guy who he volunteers at Harper's Ferry, and he's a Confederate reenactor, and I didn't think I would meet him, and it's weird. And he's always there. Like he's an archivist.
Yeah, works in DC, right? Like
he's in documents. Then in his free time, he lays on the ground as a Confederate reenactor.
And crazy money of his own.
Right. And I was like, so first of all, I'm like, like this guy, but also I'm like, he's me, right? Because I'm always trying to be in history. We just have different positions in relation to that history. I'm always like trying to dress like somebody in the 19th century. It's like this. There's a lot of similarity there, and this massive gulf. And there's a moment where I talk about he gets these glasses, like historic glasses, and it's because of pressure, right? They're like, you can't be on the reenactor field with regular today glasses. You have to wear 19th century glasses. So he spends all this money on them, and then he's like, and I got those things and you couldn't see out of them because they're so thick. And I was like, that's actually the point. Like you can't see through those Confederate lenses, right? I mean, it just, it's, and that's so it's like a subtle commentary on the lost cause, right? And that's your frame of reference. There's not clarity, even as mired as you are in history. So
interesting. And it's also interesting that I'm fascinated by people who look at the same exact information and come away with vastly different like things. Like how I'm always fascinated by that. But yeah, that was so interesting to me. As knowing you, I was just like, so you really, but I know, I know you to be sweet to a point, and I know that man had said something. So I was just like, this is interesting that you was able to sit there through a whole conversation and he didn't say anything that pushed you. I was like,
but see, this is a lesson, right? Like it didn't push me over the edge, but part of it is like he was from Maryland. I'm assuming his ancestors had fought in a Confederate regiment, and it was just his tradition. I do think this was the case. And it's also a racist tradition. And I think it connects. I think about that moment a lot now because with this sort of all these states that are passing laws about what students can learn and white kids not being able to feel, they shouldn't feel uncomfortable and all this stuff. And I keep thinking like, why is that? Why can't they imagine themselves beyond a lost cause genealogy? Why can't those children be given the opportunity to identify with freedom fighters? And I don't mean just white freedom. I don't mean just John Brown. I mean, movement people. Like if you really believe that human beings should not be defined by race, as they say, I mean, I believe that.
But you venture into other.
Yeah, a child people can model themselves off of anybody.
But also, why is our whole history based on your comfortability? So how do these Black children feel you have not in all of curriculum writing thought about the discomfort of the Black children in this class. Like this is
which discomfort is almost a given for Black children in education. How could you not be?
Y'all be fine because y'all been dealing with. You were the slaves, but I only have 2 more questions. We're gonna make it. Okay. So I kind of want to. I was gonna have you read this, but it doesn't. This is selfish. This is completely selfish right now, and I'm sorry, y'all in the audience, but this is just. It was so difficult to pick a favorite in this book, And I'm for the sake of time. Well, maybe I should just skip it. It's just so
I read the audiobook. People can hear me read.
yeah, it's so beautiful. I just as you know, as a survivor of sexual violence and as just other survivors of trauma, I was moved to tears when I read this passage. And I just think people like there's a way you did every book, my passage from Breathe, I had to actually stop using the quote from Breathe so much because people started attributing to me. And I was like, no, this is Imani Perry.
I'm not. Yeah,
Every book I have a passage that is like, ooh, this is so good. But this one is, I'm gonna say it real quick, y'all. It is what makes a secret. It really isn't who knows. Somebody always knows. Usually a bunch of people outside of the secret holder. What makes it a secret is that it cannot be spoken above a whisper without something breaking. Much of the South's conservatism is little more than an effort to zone where we place the yearnings that we don't know what to do with. Every time a pastor faces a scandal, remember that. No one thinks these things don't happen, but many, if not most, think they are supposed to be hidden. And as long as they're hidden, we are prohibited from creating more loving ways of being with one another. We aren't allowed that joy on the other side of secrecy. We cannot correct the imbalance and violence that happens in the shadows, with shame lashing out all over the one who is supposed to be beloved, unless and until we decide the truth can be spoken. Oh, that was just,
And thank you for teaching me so much that allowed me to get to writing that, because there's something about having to understand the connection, and we don't want to do this with history, but there are ways of being with other human beings that came through the logic of the plantation that echo, and they echo not just in our relations across the lines of race. They echo within communities, within families, within intimate spaces.
that's
These
right.
ways of and it's violence. It's also like it's shame. It's also refusing to acknowledge the fullness of people's identities,
Yeah.
desires that are righteous and good and beautiful. Like there is something that we have to be deliberate about undoing, about how we relate to each other, that we have inherited from a very ugly history. And we have to understand it as connected, because you can address one thing or say, okay, people can learn, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that. But there are things that are so deeply normalized,
Normalized.
ugly. We just gonna pretend that's not happening, you know. No, we just gonna pretend it's not happening. Yeah. It's not okay.
I have never heard, I can't remember hearing secrets and secrecy talked about in such a beautiful but unpacked in that way about in our community and or just generally. But I think that's such a beautiful way to talk about it. Um, it just felt alleviated. I don't know. It just I felt lifted when I read that, and so
Um,
it was.
I'm
It's
because 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 there's stuff that like we treat as individual suffering that are collective habits that need to be undone. Right.
and that's the other part that is like this is not this is the reason why we can't it's so hard to build a movement around this because we make it as we treat this is not about individuals, this is about a collective. We didn't get here. The trauma may happen to individual people. Individual people are suffering, like you said, whether it's about identity or survival of violence. It's individual people, but there's collective responsibility here, and we got to look at it in a different way.
Yep.
But I want to get this last question in so we can get to these questions. Um, So you are the quintessential movement baby.
Yes.
Really, it's all up and through, right? And a real ass Southern girl. You know, because I know you, like, and I've seen you on FaceTime throwing back a Fago and some hot Cheetos or whatever else you be drinking and eating. Exactly. I have seen it. I loved reading about it in the book, but I also I love reading about it in the book, but also all of the people who have moved in and out and around you and your parents' lives. And it struck me that this book is probably the most personally important to you, because you are always having to correct people about who you are.
Oh Lord, yes.
And like many Black women, having to bear our own souls so that other folks can understand whose they are. I'm just curious about what this book took out of you and what you are holding out hope that it will put back into this nation.
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I mean, so I think so many of us are moved by Toni Morrison's formulation. If there's a book that you want to read, you have to write it.
Absolutely.
And some of that is your own story, but your story becomes a part of a larger story, because you can do it in fiction or you can do it in nonfiction, but it's still you. So when so I want to answer the question about what I hope it does in the world, but I want to get to it by saying there are people in the world who look at me and see a series of institutions, and see a kind of like a sort of a CV. And the thing that they don't understand is that none of that would be without who I actually am, right? Which is why I'm constantly going back to my grandmother, which is why I'm constantly going back to who made me, right? And I say it that way because I couldn't have done the work that I do with the kind of values that I do, right?
Your grandma.
Without, right. So there's that. So part of what there are a couple of pieces. One piece of the book that is a subtext, but I hope it's a loud one, is that Black women being at the center, and this is in the case throughout my work. I mean, even when I wrote a letter to my son, there's a letter to my son, so much is there is an ethic for me in beginning with the consideration of Black women. And there's so much of the story of what this place is that is made invisible, that is so critical to understanding it if you don't actually consider Black women at the inception point. And what I mean is people who are excluded from legal recognition, from citizenship, whose bodies are used to produce the wealth of the nation, both through manual labor and the exploitation of their reproductive bodies, right? So to be asked to give birth to the children you love, to produce the wealth of the country, right? If you don't start with that story, there's just a lot you just are not going to understand. Right? And so to me, so part of what I want to do is I want the book to allow people to look with fresh eyes, but I want people to be pushed to pay attention differently, to attend to the stories and the experiences that are so often cast aside in history. So it's part of why I say in the book, like with respect to, J.D. Vance and his horrific book, Hillbilly Elegy, that I care more about the hillbillies than the man who wrote their elegy, even though I understand that those folks don't like me very much.
Right.
Because I'm interested in the people who don't get considered, in addition to the violence that non-consideration produces on so many levels, right? So I hope that it pushes people to have different frames. I also hope it engages people in wanting to pay attention, to pay attention to other folks, talk to people, listen.
Ooh. That part about pay attention just brought up the Walmart.
Yeah.
But the Walmart part in the book, y'all, where she talks about going to Walmart late at night we talked about this being the great equalizer, and that part really underscores that about paying attention to folks. And you really lay it out so beautifully about thinking about I remember being a little girl always looking at the first, looking at people who are homeless in the street and wondering like how you were, what I always think of? They were a child at some point.
Yes.
Right? They were like me. When I was young, they were little. They had a mom and a dad or something. They had cousins, they had parents. What happened?
What happened? Yeah.
No.
And that's so important.
Mhm.
Like, but people, and people don't look at folk. They don't attend, right? Makes things too easy, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah. So.
Whew. You are a gift, Imani Perry. You are a gift. I am. So let's see. There's a question down here.
We got a question.
This is a nice question. This is one of my favorite topics. How critical do you think empathy is when trying to educate people?
So that's such a good question. And I think it's critical. I mean, so I think it's complicated, right? Because you can, and part of the point, and I make this many times in the book, that you can love somebody and still be invested in oppressing them. Like you can love somebody, and that intimacy does not, and care doesn't necessarily mean you to justice, right? So we have to be cautious about how we read emotion. But I do believe that people are moved at the heart level along with intellectual level. If you can't just do the thinking, like the body, the mind, the emotion, the analytical have to come together. So for me as a writer, and this is to be undisciplined from academic ways of writing and choose a different discipline. I don't want to just make people think. I don't want people to just know stuff. I want something to resonate. My favorite metaphor is when you have two people playing guitars sitting in front of each other, right? And if you strum, if you're close enough, you strum on one guitar, the other guitar strings will move. That because it's about resonance, something that person said or sound they made or gesture made brought something up in you. That's how you get moved to actually be invested, right? When Tony K. Bombara says the job of the writer is to make revolution irresistible, it's about that, right? So I think it's important, but I also think we have to be it's incredibly important. We have to be very, very cautious about thinking feeling is the same as respect.
That's a word. That's a word. Let me see. Is this another question? Hold on one second. What writers influence your writing? I can answer that, but I'm gonna let her answer.
So there's books that are specifically influential to this one, like South to a Very Old Place by Albert Murray, Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk, Richard Wright's Black Boy, V.S. Naipaul's A Turn in the South. There's a whole genre of books that are traveling through the South. Most of them are like, oh, look at this weird, quick, quirky place. But some are really deep and like get to like the zeitgeist, the soul, the heart of the region and how it's connected to the world. And so those books, but the larger influences, I mean, of course, it's Morrison. There's Sonia Sanchez. There is this just, and Murray is always, I call him my tar baby because I can't get unstuck from him, even though I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but, someone who's trying to understand Alabama. And then there's musicians, like Thelonious Monk is a huge influence. And why I'm part of my writing is elliptical. Like I come back to stuff because he did all these permutations with different combinations. He would play a wrong note and then make it right. Like stuff like that I like. So there's so many. I'm a reader first and a writer second.
Can we just talk about, I wish we had like hours and hours. The music the fact that you put, I've been listening to Bobbie Blue Bland for 3 days now.
Yes.
And today, even though you didn't mention him in the book, today I had to put some what's his name on. I've been listening to Johnny Taylor.
Oh yes.
Just because these last $2.
And you know what I had? It was taken out. A vexing editorial decision, but I had a whole part about, oh gosh.
On blues.
No, Lupus. Oh gosh, it's terrible because I think about him because he also has, but Trina and you know, Naya, you know, you don't know Naya, yeah.
Terrible.
There's a whole section on Trick Daddy because there's also a genealogy from the blues there.
Thank you. They like Trick Daddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So while we wait to see if there's another question, I just want to throw in real quick. Can you talk? I was, one of the things that of course, you notice too, that I'm always so annoyed by, struggling with, are these, what are they, culture wars or whatever they call them, about, because my genealogy is split down the middle with Southern and Caribbean.
Yeah.
I was really delighted about this, that you added the Bahamas and Havana in here, but I know it probably threw some people off.
Oh yeah,
While we wait and see if there's another question, can you talk quickly about why you added that in there?
I will, and it actually is connected to Trick Daddy and Trina, because part of what I was trying to do by talking about them, because in Miami chapter I talk about there's this whole multicultural story in the history of Miami specifically, but the structure is the same, right? And I try to do this with the Bahamas too, right? And I've done this in previous books. The Bahamas had a Jim Crow order, right? And so, like, James Weldon Johnson, who wrote the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. His mama was was Bahamian. His parents met in New York. They went to the Bahamas during the Civil War because they thought that slavery was going to be reenacted if the South won. And then they moved back to Florida, like these. And so part of the point is that there are patterns of migration that were forced migration, because in the context of slavery, people moved between the places we think of as the United States and not. There are patterns of escape, so there are Black people who are in the Bahamas because the British promised them freedom if they fought for the British Army in the Revolutionary War, and then they resettled there. And then most were from South Carolina. That's a huge part of the population. And I got there because I asked a simple question: why do they eat grits for breakfast? I was trying to figure it out, and similar, there's this sort of history with Cuba. There's a relationship between Cuba and Alabama, and it's really important to me for people to understand that so much of what we think of as the diaspora wars only come about as a possibility because of the post-decolonization and post-civil rights movement conception. Because the reality is, for most of this history of, after empire, right, and the transatlantic slave trade, Black people are not citizens anywhere, right? There's colonial government, except Haiti. Like, Liberia is still a colonial project, and Ethiopia. So Haiti and Ethiopia, right? But everywhere else. And so this notion that you have this fidelity to this nation state where you just sit, you can't see the connections. Okay, but you need to understand that people were moving around trying to figure out how to get free, right? So, the whole population in Trinidad called the Americans, because they were people who was, the Black folks in Mexico who were coming from Florida. Like,
it's a mosh posh. It's so, listen, Imani knows that one of my big pastimes, hobbies, is doing my genealogy through Ancestry and all this other stuff. And when I did my DNA and I have it separated out, who was on my grandmother's line, who's on my grandfather's line, and I'm very detailed, and everything's color coded. And I got messed up one day because I had a person who showed up on my grandmother's and my grandfather's by DNA. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this thing is messed up. There's a glitch in the matrix. No, this is so, it's because we came, this is a person who, I went through all of this process to find out, who clearly came through the Caribbean and landed in South Carolina.
Yes.
Like, this is, it's all connected. And this is why it's so stupid.
Let me tell you the story, and we should probably get off, but I would tell this really quick story.
Oh, wait, go ahead. We got a question. Why are you doing
it? Answer the question. So I was, when I was with New Orleans Book Festival. What?
No, we don't have a question. That's just me not knowing how to work this thing.
From New Orleans Book Festival. So I'm in the car trying to get to the airport. I have messed up my whole plan, so I'm barely about to make my flight.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be really fast. So I said, I get in the car, and the man sees Black man, and I said, so I'm talking to him, and I said, let me guess where you're from. And he was like, okay. And I said, are you from Honduras or Belize?
Oh, I love this. Yeah.
There's a very specific, Black Central American speech pattern, right? And he laughs and he says, I'm from Honduras, but my grandmother was from Belize. And then he starts to tell me his genealogy. He said his daddy was from Savannah, was stationed in Honduras. And so had a first wife and then moved to Honduras, had a second wife, built a family. His daddy's mother had come from Belize to Savannah, right? And then his family, his sisters and brothers who were from Georgia, all moved to Honduras. So whole Spanish speaking. And then he starts telling me, so that, so his story is exactly how, you dig a little bit, many Black Americans, not me, because let me tell you, I was astonished to find, first of all, everybody going back is from the Upper South, which blew my mind, Virginia, colonial Virginia and stuff. But I think most Black Americans, you dig that you start to see these connections that are really become global. And he started talking about his working on ships and what it was like to be off the coast of Nigeria and encounter pirates who wanted water, and then going to, Dominican Republic, where the U.S. would clean their ships before coming. Anyway, amazing stuff. Thank you.
Or the people who came through World War II, like my grandfather came from Jamaica during World War II, working in the United States. Then they go back to Jamaica. Like, you can't. Anyway, here's a question. Quick question. We have, would you be willing to talk about Mr. Walter? As a reader and learner, he stood out in this book in such a beautiful way, a vessel. Thank you.
Yes. Walter Evans, I was just telling a story. I was at work and someone had a Romare Bearden piece on the wall. And I said, I'm going to tell you a story about that piece because I went to Walter Evans' house. He's an art collector. He's also the person who gave David Blight the Frederick Douglass papers that enabled him to write the book that won the Pulitzer and the National Book Award. He is also the person who introduced the recent biography of Malcolm X that won all of the awards. He introduced that person to Malcolm X. He gave him papers from Malcolm X's personal library, and they had made friends as migrants from the South. Him and Les, I can't think of his last name, but the writer of that, who passed before of the Malcolm X book, they had met working in Hartford in the summers in tobacco fields, which lots of Black Southern teenagers did, including Martin Luther King Jr., who would go work in the fields in Tennessee. Les Payne, thank you. So Walter is just amazing, and he has an incredible art collection. So I go to his house for the first time. I asked David Blight, I was like, can I meet him? He said, sure. And then, of course, Walter's like, I'll meet everybody, but I agree to meet. And he's a surgeon from Savannah, built his professional life in Detroit, came back home for retirement. And so we walk into his house. I've never seen an art collection like this in my life. I mean, better than virtually any museum, and we go up the steps and he says to me, do you recognize that painting? I say, yes. And he said, where is it from? And I said, it's a painting Romare Bearden did from out of the window of Albert Murray's apartment in Harlem at Lenox Terrace. And he was like, oh, okay. And he said, have you seen it before? And I said, yeah, I've seen it at the moment. He said, tell me which one is better, mine or the one that's at the moment. And I was like, oh, yours. It's because it's it's an incredible, and it was one of those kismet moments, right? I'm influenced by Albert Murray. Albert Murray named all of Romare Bearden's paintings, and he gives me this window to understand this tradition. And he just like talks to me. So I've become like an apprentice to him. And I was actually supposed to write a piece about him for a legacy publication, and they rejected the first version because they were like, you're too close. And I was like, but that's the story. The story is that I became close to him. He's like an uncle to me. That's the tradition too. So we'll see if it ever gets out. I'm still trying to work on it. But he's amazing. His story should be written like on its own. I want to write a piece about him because he's an incredible collector. Yeah.
So I know we are over time. Okay. There's the last question here from that says, can you say, this is from our previous question, can you say more about feeling not being the same as respect, or how you put it?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing that, and I'm writing a book about patriarchy helped me to understand this, but we can love people deeply. And in fact, the fact that we love them and believe that, I don't know what happened to T, but the fact that we believe in a particular ideology can make us express our love in ways that are actually about dominating and oppressing them. So, I don't, respect actually demands more of you in some ways than love, because respect demands that you don't allow your feelings don't colonize the other person. Hey,
Sorry about that.
Respect means that you actually believe that this person ought to be able to conceive of themselves and their lives on their own terms, even if your heart says that they should be different.
I think that is beautiful and perfect and dead on. This is everything I hoped it would be. I hope you all the same way.
And thank you for being patient with us.
Yes, thank you so much. This was great.
Agreed. Agreed. You couldn't see me on screen, but I'm just over here nodding the whole time, like snapping and claps.
Is this saved? Like people can reference it afterward?
Yes. We will. I will send both of you the HD video, like the footage, and then we're going to be making little clips for Instagram of like some powerful phrases and quotes.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Thank you.
Come on,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I'm honored to have to be like the last stop on this virtual book tour. This was everything.
Yeah.
Just so much powerful and moving insight about this subject that we really are reckoning with. It's such an honor to be in community with both of you, and hopefully the next time we'll be in person.
Let's go.
Yes, indeed.
And I'll see you.
Sorry.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
I also want to thank Caitlin Maroney-Liskey and HarperCollins for helping make this happen. Don't forget to get your copy of the book at the store or online. Thank you to everyone that participated.
Yep, click that button, y'all. It's right there.
Thanks. And good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.